Now, here's a name that really doesn't need an introduction. In fact, I bet you can almost tell a cinephile's age by which movie they think of first when they hear the name Michael Caine. For me personally, and I guess for my generation, it's probably the lighter stuff, the turn of the century comedies. Things like Miss Congeniality or the iconic actor portraying Nigel Powers in Austin Powers' Goldmember. Or perhaps it's the Christopher Nolan phase, when the actor became part of the recurring cast, and suddenly Alfred isn't just a background character anymore. He's a key emotional pillar of the Dark Knight trilogy. But beyond those big, mainstream touchpoints, there's this incredibly rich filmography that only reveals itself once you start digging. In my experience as a cinephile, what really made Caine stand out early on was how much he went against the traditional suave British gentleman image. There was something much more grounded about him, almost kitchen sink in how he approached action and the spy genre. His version of Harry Palmer, for example, is basically the stylistic opposite of what Connery was doing at the time with the James Bond character. And then you've got Get Carter, which brings a level of grittiness and violence that you'd never see in the 007 movie. It feels meaner, more rooted in real streets rather than fantasy. At the same time, the actor also cultivated this lighter, more playful side. Films like Alfie show a completely different kind of screen presence, and what's really impressive is how he eventually blends those two personas. Titles such as The Italian Job and Sleuth feel like perfect examples of that. He's charismatic and playful, but there's still an edge underneath it all that suggests he's more than capable of tackling the action. Of course, like a lot of actors with careers this long, there's a stretch that people usually point to as the so-called paycheck era. And yeah, there are some pretty uninspired titles here, things like Ashanti and The Island. But what's interesting is that even in films that are clearly flat on a creative level, Caine always managed to deliver the goods. He gave credible, emotionally engaged performances, and you never get the sense that he's just phoning it in. He's still a professional, even when the material isn't doing him any favors. That run eventually gave way to a real critical comeback, one that really started in 1986 with Hannah and Her Sisters, that Woody Allen film that earns him the first of his 2 Academy Awards and marked a shift back toward more respected, prestige roles. His workmanlike ethic, dedication, and refusal to be pigeonholed into a single genre are what really marked this as a great career. So, with a filmography that spans more than 130 titles across 8 decades, it's inevitable that some films end up getting overshadowed by the bigger hits and the award winners. These are movies that sit in the shadow of Caine's most acclaimed and commercially successful work, but they're by no means inferior. They're just quieter entries that tend to get lost in the conversation. So, to give them the attention they deserve, here are my top 5 picks for Michael Caine's most underrated movies, listed in chronological order. But before we get started, here are a few honorable mentions. Gambit, a cleverly scripted, expertly directed, twisty heist picture that really shines thanks to Caine's take on a career burglar and his on-screen chemistry with Shirley MacLaine. It's light, playful, and a great example of how charming he could be in this kind of material. The Marseille Contract. This one feels like a spiritual follow-up to Get Carter. It's a solid entry in that Euro thriller tradition, and it never tries to copy the style of The French Connection. It's grittier, moodier, and very much doing its own thing. The Fourth Protocol, a Cold War spy thriller that pairs Caine with a then-future James Bond actor Pierce Brosnan. Caine plays a dog-independent MI5 officer, and that stubborn, procedural energy is really central to why the movie works as well as it does. And finally, one to avoid. It probably won't come as a surprise, but unless you're in the mood for something that's so bad it's good, or you're just a glutton for punishment, you should avoid Jaws the Revenge at all costs. And now moving on to the ranking, at number 5 we have The Man Who Would Be King. John Huston's adventure epic is strangely under-discussed when people talk about the great films of the 1970s, but it really shouldn't be. This was, after all, a very well critically received entry that did solid business at the box office and stands as one of Huston's late masterpieces. The story follows 2 former British soldiers in colonial India played by Sean Connery and Michael Caine, who head off to the remote region of Kafiristan with dreams of setting themselves up as conquerors. Through a mix of military know-how, bravado, and sheer luck, they unite local tribes, and Connery's character, Daniel Dravot, ends up being mistaken for a god. As the power and wealth start to pile up, Dravot begins to believe his own mythology, whilst Caine's Peachy grows increasingly uneasy and just wants to get out before it all collapses. As the stakes rise, the adventure takes on a much heavier emotional weight. What makes this one special is that it's a rare modern swashbuckler that genuinely feels epic, but also very character-driven. On one hand, you get the big-scale adventure, but it's grounded in sharp, literate dialogue and classical storytelling craft. Huston keeps the tone beautifully balanced between a rousing boy's own escapade and a much harsher imperial fable, so it works both as pure entertainment and as a critique of greed and hubris. And the chemistry between Connery and Caine is explosive. You really buy them as longtime friends, which gives the later sections of the movie real emotional weight, rather than just spectacle. Caine's Peachy works as the audience's anchor. He's rugged and motivated by profit, but he's also more clear-eyed than Dravot, so you feel his mixture of awe, irritation, and genuine affection as his friend goes a bit too far. He modulates beautifully from comic energy in the early con artist sections to airy pragmatism in Kafiristan, and finally to a more sobered, reflective version of the character. It's in the later portion of the movie where Caine really lands. His broken, reflective delivery gives the ending its haunting power. It's also a very technically smart performance. Caine plays Peachy as a thinking man, always assessing and reacting, and by the end, accepting the cost of their overreach with a kind of battered dignity that really lingers after the credits roll. And from the far-flung adventures to the much more dangerous confines of theater, Caine's next underrated gem comes right at the tail of his pure paycheck era. At number 4, we have Deathtrap. The setup is deliciously simple. Caine plays Sidney Brule, a once successful Broadway thriller writer whose latest play has flopped, leaving him desperate, bitter, and humiliated. When a former student sends him a brilliant new script, Sidney realizes he may have a way out. He invites the young writer to his isolated country house and begins toying with the idea of killing him and stealing the play as his own. From there, the movie becomes a constant game of misdirection with apparent murders, psychic warnings, and shifting alliances folding in on themselves until you're never quite sure who's playing who. What makes Deathtrap such a pleasure is how tightly constructed and playful it is. It is essentially a stage thriller on film. A small cast, one main location, and a set of sharp turns that constantly reset your expectations. Director Sidney Lumet leans into the theatricality rather than trying to hide it, so you get the fun of watching control and leverage shift almost in real time. It plays like a twisted chess match, just with murder weapons. The title is also often remembered as one of the films that proved Christopher Reeve could do far more than Superman, as he moves from eager protege to something much darker and more dangerous. Caine makes Sidney both pathetic and genuinely threatening. You feel the wounded ego of a has-been, but you also see the excitement when he realizes that real murder might be his ticket back to relevance. He plays the tonal shifts with real precision, moving from that urban-esque charm to bullying cruelty to panicked vulnerability, and as a result the film's many reversals feel driven by character rather than just clever plotting. And, crucially, Caine understands Sidney as a performer within the story. He's always playing to whoever holds the upper hand, whether he's manipulating his wife, testing his protege, or improvising around his neighbor's visions. Watching him think on his feet becomes the real pleasure of the movie. And whilst Deathtrap explores Caine's darkly comic side, the third title on the list finds him back in gangster territory with the 1986 classic Mona Lisa. This title is the living proof that the actor never needed huge amounts of screen time or even top billing to leave a serious impression. The film centers on Bob Hoskins as a small-time London crook fresh out of prison who's put to work as a chauffeur and bodyguard for a high-class escort played by Kathy Tyson. What begins as a purely transactional arrangement slowly turns into something more complex as Hoskins' character becomes emotionally entangled and agrees to help search for a missing teenage girl. That search pulls him deeper into London's underworld, with escalating violence, broken loyalties, and a trajectory that steadily darkens and intensifies. Mona Lisa works as a grimy but surprisingly tender neo-noir romance. It captures that spirit of Thatcher-era London with real texture, blending crime thriller tension with moments of genuine emotion and vulnerability. Hoskins and Tyson have electric chemistry amid the squalor, whilst Neil Jordan's direction mixes dark humor, social grit, and a kind of operatic tragedy that still feels fresh decades later. The film won Hoskins several awards, and the screenplay rewards patient viewers with a powerful emotional payoff. As Danny Mortwell, Caine brings icy authority and understated menace to a compact but pivotal role. He's the spider at the center of the web, casually ordering hits or applying pressure, all whilst projecting old-school gangster polish. His clipped Cockney edge contrasts perfectly with Hoskins' raw vulnerability, making every scene between them feel charged. You're constantly reminded of the criminal's world brutal hierarchy, and once again, Caine shows how magnetic he can be without dominating the screen. He plays the casual immorality cleanly and without grandstanding, and his key confrontations carry a chilling sense of inevitability. The next title on the list finds Caine heading straight back into comedy territory and paired with one of the genre's all-time greats. At number 2 we have Dirty Rotten Scoundrels. Once again, Caine is playing with and subverting what people expect from the polished image of the British gentleman, this time by turning that elegance into a weapon. The setup is classic. Caine plays Lawrence Jameson, a refined conman who rules the French Riviera by fleecing wealthy women until Steve Martin's loud, chaotic American grifter crashes his operation. What follows is a battle of egos and style as the two strike a bet to see who can con a naive Harris first, leading to a series of increasingly elaborate schemes, double crosses, and ever more outrageous gags. Dirty Rotten Scoundrels is a pitch-perfect screwball comedy remake of Bedtime Story. It's packed with sharp wordplay and Riviera glamour that still resonates today. The on-screen chemistry between Caine and Martin is the real engine behind the success of the movie. The class clash rivalry turns into a kind of infectious comic rhythm where every scene becomes a duel of timing and escalation. Frank Oz directs with real precision, keeping the pace snappy and the structure twisty enough that the film rewards repeated viewings, not just for the jokes, but for how cleverly everything is structured. Caine embodies Lawrence's sophistication with effortless charm. He's the definition of a cultured shark, gliding through cons with dry wit, immaculate tailoring, and total confidence. What really sells it, though, are his reactions to Martin's chaos. The raised eyebrows, the weary sighs, the precise verbal jabs, all of it shows a master comedian working in miniature. It's one of the actor's best light comic performances. Caine blends snobbery with just enough warmth to make Lawrence oddly sympathetic, even as he's clearly a scoundrel. I wrap up this list on a much darker tone with the final entry, the 1990 dark satire, A Shock to the System. When Caine is good, there's no denying he's good. But when he's bad, he's often even better. And this film feels like the moment where the man who gave us Harry Palmer turns corporate frustration into murder, with Caine delivering one of his most chillingly affable villain performances. The actor plays Graham Marshall, a middling ad executive who's passed over for promotion, trapped in a miserable marriage and quietly seething with resentment. After an accidental killing on the subway, Graham begins to see violence as a twisted form of opportunity. What follows is a series of increasingly calculated decisions. As his career fortunes shift, the moral stakes rise with them, and the film becomes this darkly funny portrait of a man discovering that violence is the fastest route to professional success. What makes A Shock to the System such a great finale pick is how clean and sharp the satire is. It skewers 1980s corporate culture and the fantasy of consequence-free ambition in a way that clearly anticipates American Psycho. The pacing is tight, the voiceover is razor-sharp, and the film keeps the murders inventive whilst never losing its sense of ironic bite. It's also a genuinely underrated gem. It punches well above its straight-to-video reputation and rewards rewatches, especially if you enjoy glossy thrillers with a mean sense of humor. Caine's Graham is Bateman light with the British flair. He plays him as an outwardly mild-mannered everyman, masking something cold and calculating underneath. What's so effective is how he layers quiet rage under charm. Watch the way his eyes harden in office confrontations, or how a small smile creeps in after a successful kill. The transformation in his confidence and self-image feels unsettling and completely earned. And as I mentioned, the voiceover is key. It turns Graham into a vibrantly warped anti-hero, letting us live inside his smug, self-justifying worldview. And there you have it, 5 additions to your watch list that should send you straight back into Michael Caine's deep and endlessly rewarding filmography.